Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. It's been a while since the last one, but I finally got some time to actually make some content. And with the next patch coming up in a day or two, I thought I would review Mordo and Ancient One, since a lot of people have been asking me about that, how those characters perform in PvP specifically, since you probably already know how they perform in PvE. In addition to that, as you can see from the background image, this is going to be a review or update to the Alliance Conquest tier list, focusing primarily on the characters that came out with the last patch and how they stack up with the current roster. I'm also going to be giving away crystal coupons, and this time to make it a little bit easier for myself, I'm only going to be distributing them through Discord, so make sure to join my Discord channel. You can find the link in the description below, and after you've done that, just leave a comment in the comment section down below with your Discord account name. Before I talk about the upgraded Alliance Conquest tier list, I'm going to be looking at Ancient One and Mordo in PvP. So I did some tests in Timeline so that I can give you some insights on how they perform and some build options that you can use for them. I would say that both characters are kind of average, but because they have Reflect to energy damage characters, they can be a pretty good hard counter. As you saw from the previous clip, my Ancient One was able to completely solo that team because Thanos does energy damage, even though he has physical items or gears that build up his energy damage. Hela is obviously energy damage as well, and Colossus is a combat type, which she has a type advantage versus. One of the good things about Ancient One is that she cycles some of her best skills, which is the 4th skill that does pretty good damage, as well as the 3rd one, and the 5th skill, which is the most important because it provides the debuff to herself and her teammates, and heals for a little bit as well. Because the character is very heavily reliant on Reflect, I would highly recommend using either a CTP of Regen or Authority. I did try out a CTP of Regen, but found out that the Authority worked a lot better for her because the healing from the 5 isn't too much, and when she goes into iframe or invisible, that healing from the 5th doesn't actually heal her. To add to that, if you're able to get her artifact and reforge your Authority, you can stack up the steal effect with the mitigation from the artifact, making her survive even longer and reflecting more damage. What's nice is that her uniform passive also increases buffs by 20%, meaning that if you're running a Steel Authority, the mitigation, the damage accumulated, and the invincible will be bumped up a little bit higher. One of the very apparent downsides to the character is that she doesn't have iframe ignore, which means that she struggles versus characters that can iframe a lot, since those characters also do not take any reflect damage. So that would be characters like Doom that iframe a lot, and characters like Adam Warlock, which deal a very high amount of damage in a very short period of time, allowing for little time for the reflect to actually occur. Though in Timeline you can make the best use of that reflect by swapping in when an energy attack character is attacking, allowing you to reflect all of the damage back since you are immortal for 1 second. As a solo character, I would say that Mordo is probably better than Ancient One, especially if you have access to his artifact that allows him to have iframe ignore across all of his skills. Because many blast characters are energy typed, he is a very strong counter versus them, though he does seem to struggle versus characters like Warlock because of a fatal flaw to his kit, which is that some of his most important effects are only active during certain conditions, like when he takes hits. So what I mean by this is that his most important effects, like the energy reflect and energy damage immunity, only really activates after he gets hit at an 80% chance. And even then, it only has a 5-second uptime with a 7-second downtime, which is a lot. In addition to that, the iframe ignore on his artifact only activates at a chance when he's dodged. For this reason, I would highly advise building him defensively similar to Ancient One in order to maximize the reflect and access to those really great effects, as well as prolong his lifespan, allowing for him to enter the Awakening skill as much as possible. You can see that he's actually pretty good since he is able to take out characters that aren't energy based like Chavez and Spider-Man that you saw before, but unfortunately due to the reliance of those effects that occur when he gets hit, he is a little bit inconsistent. His base HP is actually pretty low, and the healing that he gets from using the 4th skill through the passive is only about 20%, meaning that the most you could bump it up is to around 40% with the recovery rate from the regen, which is one of the reasons why I would probably recommend a CTP of Authority, especially if you can get a mighty version with the steal effect over a regen. The mitigation from his character synergizes really well with the steal effect from Authority, and because oftentimes you're waiting to get hit, especially when you're trying to attack characters that are iframing, waiting for that artifact to get that iframe ignore, you're going to be taking a lot of hits and building up that damage accumulation from Authority, which allows you to hit even harder. You can see a perfect example of that here, where the artifact activates, allowing me to hit Thanos and take him out, and then with the artifact still up, I'm able to attack Spider-Man in his own iframes and take him out as well. I kind of expected Mordo to be a lot better versus Warlock, but because Warlock has passive healing from his artifact and he iframes a lot, it makes it very difficult to be able to reflect damage back to him and take him out in that short period of time where that 5 seconds energy damage immunity and energy damage reflect is up for Mordo. To add to that, the native penetration and high burst damage from Warlock, even without a proc, is even more reasons why Mordo isn't a reliable counter versus him. Moving over to the Alliance Conquest tier list, you can see that America Chavez jumped up to the very top of the meta, which I call walls, and are characters that are very difficult to take down, while at the same time being able to take out full teams by themselves. She was previously in the lower meta, or what I call busters, which are characters that can take out full teams by themselves, but usually require other meta characters or strong characters to be able to do so. It's no surprise that this character is at the top of the meta, since you can even see from the little icons that I added all of the great effects that she has. She has a support capability, providing HP to characters on the team. She has a pretty decent leadership. She can survive pretty well with her healing and constant iframes. She has the capability to one-shot because of her damage accumulation on her skills, like her 3, I believe. And she has iframe ignore and counter, which is one of the biggest things for making a character really strong in PvP. To give you an idea of why I placed her where I did, here she is taking out one of the top team combinations in Alliance Conquest all by herself. Another reason that I didn't mention that makes her so great for Alliance Conquest is that she is an awakened character. So being able to survive and take out all of a team by herself allows her to basically do the same thing immediately on the second team, since she opens with the awakened skill. I wasn't able to test out how she handles characters that deal physical reflect on the second team, such as the defenders or Black Dwarf, but she does have physical reflect reduction, which means that she could possibly be able to beat them, especially because that awakening skill is also an iframe on top of that. You can basically team her with any other character that you want to add extra health to, but for me that's usually been Warlock with Molecule Man, or Dr. Doom or Silver Surfer with Spider-Man. In terms of counters, you have many options, including good blast types or meta characters like Warlock, Emma, Jean, Cersei, or Mr. Sinister with his artifact. Wong is one character that I was surprised performed so well in Alliance Conquest, considering that in Timeline, his AI and skill rotation is actually pretty awful. Funny enough, even though I was using the character in the leadership position to test out other characters, since he provides that damage immunity to magic tagged characters, he was frequently the last one to survive, and oftentimes soloed entire teams, even just using his second skill, iframe ignore counter. Doctor Strange is one of the characters that I paired up with Wong, but sadly, because they removed the iframe ignore from his base kit with the new uniform, and because the artifact provides the iframe ignore but it really doesn't because it never activates, he basically has very high burst damage with his new kit, but his survival is very low and he can't hit characters with the iframe ignore. I did leave the iframe ignore tag on the tier list because you can use his older uniform if you're fighting against a character that iframes a lot, or you might possibly get lucky once in a full moon with his artifact proccing and allowing you to hit iframed characters. In this clip, you see me using Wong in the leadership position to provide that damage immunity that I mentioned, as well as the damage buff support to Doctor Strange. Because of Strange's high burst damage from the kit and the support that Wong provides, I'm able to take out Emma and Doom, but sadly I'm not able to survive the full fight with either of the characters, despite the fact that Wong actually outlived Doctor Strange. So here is the exact same team again, which kind of highlights how poor Doctor Strange's survival is and how good Dr. Wong's survival is. But as you can see, even though it looked like the fight was over right away, Wong was able to survive and even take out the full team by himself with a CTP of Greed and not even a survival based build. So another example here, I'm using Ancient One instead of Wasp, so I would get a little bit of extra healing and the debuff from her, but both of them die instantly and it's left up to Dr. Wong to deal with his patients. Not only does he take out a top meta character like Emma, but finishes off both of Jean's lives by himself. Similar to the other clips, I was actually trying to test out Ancient One in this one, but she ends up dying, so it pretty much becomes a Wong showcase. For some reason, the last quarter health of the character is a problem for the opponents, and I'm guessing that's because he gets some of his effects up, and that Greed ambush effect procs, keeping him from being locked down and allowing him to constantly keep entering that iframe ignore on his second skill. In this last example, you can see again, even though the opponent team is strafed, so they start off with a quarter health, Doctor Strange and Ancient One still end up dying, and Wong is the last one left alive to clean up the mess. I wanted to put Mordo higher on the tier list in the upper meta because he can solo teams, but he is kind of inconsistent for the reasons that I mentioned before. He relies heavily on being hit first to get most of his important stats up, and because of that he can be problematic since the opponent might be able to take him out before he can really start to get going. As a result of that, I put him in the lower meta since he'll likely need some additional help from another character in order to consistently win versus the opponent. You can see I also included a self debuff icon, which is represented with that little broom, but more often than not I would advise to run him with a debuff leadership since it's only for 4 seconds and isn't very helpful most of the time. For the first test, I took him up against some of the easier metas like Ancient One and Doctor Strange, and as you can see, because of the speed type advantage, he has no problems winning against them at all. And like I mentioned before, one of the reasons that I think Mordo is a little bit better than Ancient One is because once he wins that first fight, the Awakening allows him to easily take out the opponents on the second team. In this second clip, you can kind of see what I mean about the inconsistencies, since if the opponent is able to survive past that 5-second mark, then all of his great buffs, including his reflect and energy damage immunity, are down, and he loses pretty much all of his strength in being able to counter the opponent. You can see another example of that here. He's able to take out characters like Jean and Hyperion relatively easily, but the longer that the fight carries on versus Emma, the harder it is for him to win since his reflect and energy damage immunity will be down and he'll lose his best skills versus these types of characters. This is one of the reasons why I placed him in the lower meta category, since he would function much more consistently if you have a good character to help him in the fights. But he can still obviously solo teams, especially if you use him as a hard counter versus energy types, blast types, or the ones that he has an obvious greatest advantage versus, energy blast types. It's really unfortunate that he doesn't have the magic tag and that you can't pair him with Wong, since that would be a really good team up considering that Wong has that damage immunity leadership and Mordo does have that self debuff to an extent. I didn't really test out too many teams with him since I was more concerned with his solo capability, but because he usually functioned pretty well, I would suggest running him with a good combat type that you want to protect since he does have that energy reflect and the type advantage when the opponent uses a blast to counter your combat. There's tons of options that you can run him with, and some potential ones could be Black Dwarf, especially with his leadership, Hulk, Hulkbuster, America Chavez, and even Shang-Chi to get that double reflect similar to Black Dwarf. Also, while I did mention that the longer the fight goes, the more he will struggle, that only goes up to the 30-second mark, because once he reaches that point, he can basically awaken and wipe out the team. Considering Ancient One relies so heavily on Reflect and doesn't have any kind of iframe ignore, she does struggle a little bit as a solo character, which is why I put her in the lower meta or the busters category, where she would function better with another strong support or damage character. One of those strong characters that synergizes very well with her, as you saw previously, is Wong, because he has that damage immunity leadership and the additional damage increase passive. The Wong Ancient One combo is actually surprisingly good versus the Mephisto Dormammu combo that you find often in Alliance Conquest. The reason for this is because Wong has a type advantage, and Ancient One is able to reflect much of the energy damage from those two main characters. In addition to that, if you have Ancient One's artifact, which you should have from the previous Collector's Vault, she gains added mitigation and a damage increase versus supervillain types, which both of them are. Besides Dormammu and Mephisto, another team that she won consistently against was the Eternals. The reason being that she is a blast type, so she has an advantage versus Gilgamesh, and the fact that she has energy reflect means that she can take out Cersei in her first life, and when she awakens, she can basically down herself from the reflect on the second life. Besides that, most often Icarus is used in the lead position or in another position, and since he is energy-based damage, he'll also die from the reflect. And if the opponent tries to use another kind of combination like Drax leadership, then Ancient One still has a type advantage versus him as well. Similar to Doctor Strange, Scarlet Witch is in the lower meta or busters category because she does have better burst damage with the new uniform, but her survival is lacking and she lost the ability to reflect energy damage from her third skill. You can see that damage potential in this first clip, where she basically eliminates every character on the opponent team, including Thanos, but isn't able to take out Hela because of her immortal artifact. Since her survival isn't as good as Hela's, she ultimately succumbs to her damage. Despite this, and taking into consideration that she lost her reflect, she is now more consistent with her high burst damage and is even able to take out some teams like the Defenders, even though they have mental resistance, because she has mental resistance down. The character also has some pretty good skill priority, meaning that she'll likely attack first, and if the opponent doesn't have long iframes, she'll likely win the encounter. Kaecilius and Clea aren't really worth mentioning. It's really unfortunate that they didn't get uniforms, and they really should, since they could be pretty effective when comboed with Wong. Kaecilius with the artifact and awakening can potentially do something for you versus the B tier and lower of the tier list, but that's not really anything unique, and I didn't really test it since it doesn't help you out too much, considering that other characters that aren't awakening can probably do the same thing. One thing of note though is that Clea did get a pretty good stat bump with her awakening, meaning that if and when she does get a uniform in the future, she should be pretty good when paired up with Wong and other magic type characters. As a bonus, here is the timeline tier list. It didn't really change much. Wong got added as a potential support, which won't often get used, and America Chavez is now one of the higher or more used supports, considering that her passive can't be countered. But with that considered, damage modifying passives like Hela and Colossus will probably still give you more value. If you're still watching, this is also the updated artifact tier list, which I won't really cover since it's pretty self-explanatory. Also, while I was making this video, the patch notes for the next patch just dropped, and Mordo did get that magic tag that I was talking about earlier in the video, which is awesome. And there is tons of stuff for me to test out for the next patch, which I'm really excited for. Some people are kind of begrudgingly not excited for the T4, which I can understand, since the material drop rate will probably not be that great. But in reality, you don't really need to do anything different than just keep playing the game in order to get the T4 upgrades. I might also include a standalone Dormammu giant boss raid video to explain the mechanics for that fight, since it just got featured in the patch notes. I'll obviously also be testing the 4 characters and the upgrades they got, as well as how they handle PvE and PvP content. Anyways, this video got a little bit longer than I expected, so if you're still watching, thanks for your time, and please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing since it does really help me out. So that does it for this one. Thanks again, but the video is now over.